Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Chris. I greatly appreciate those very kind words. It is so great to see you and great to be here again at another NRA convention. I am very excited to be back under a little different circumstances than when I signed up to come here. But I wanted to come, even though, as Chris mentioned, we are no longer in this race for president in 2012. I wanted to come to just say two things, really. Number one, thank you. Thank you for being an organization and a group of people who, even outside of this organization, go back out into your communities and fight for those rights that you've heard the two previous speakers talk about so eloquently. Talk about those rights that are unalienable. Talk about the rights that make this country the greatest country in the history of the world. The National Rifle Association is not just an association that protects the Second Amendment. It protects fundamental freedoms, of which the Second Amendment guarantees that they are protected. That's what you folks do, and I'm here to thank you for doing that. I wish I was supposed to come today with my wife, Karen. She was scheduled to speak at a luncheon earlier, and as many of you know, we had a little hiccup over the weekend, over Easter weekend, and our youngest, our little girl, Bella, ended up being sick and ended up in the hospital for several days. She is out of the hospital and on the mend, and I want to thank, of course, everybody for your prayers for her and for our family. But Karen, she's still not nearly 100%, and so Karen didn't feel comfortable flying across country to be away. So you got the short end of the stick. You just got me instead of me and Karen. And when it comes to gun rights advocates, I have to say I don't hold a candle to my wife. I always see, if Chris was right, I am a hunter and I'm a gun owner, but she owns way more guns than I do. And she gets a chance to shoot them more often than I do. So you will hopefully have an opportunity in the future to get a chance to talk to her and to hear her passion. And let me assure you, it is a passion for the Second Amendment. And Karen and I are life members of the NRA, and we wanted to announce today that I talked to Chris, and now Bella is a life member of the NRA too. And I hope it's a long life. Well, I just have to tell you that on the campaign trail, it was really fascinating. We got a chance, as Chris said, to talk about American values. And not just talk about them, but try to demonstrate them. Really enjoyed the opportunity to go out on several of occasions to demonstrate the importance of our rights. One of them was the opportunity to talk about the Second Amendment, and we did several hunting trips, actually a couple of them in Iowa. We had the national media trailing along with us as we went on a bird hunt in central Iowa right before the Iowa caucuses, and it was very exciting. My son my 19-year-old was out on his first pheasant hunt, and first bird that came up, he knocked it right out of the air, and it was on Fox News within 2 hours. It was great. So we had an opportunity to sort of showcase in a very important sense the right to bear arms and the importance of these traditions and these rights in our country. I also took it to going to some shooting ranges and doing some target practice as part of a town hall meeting. We did that. We had several of those scheduled and really enjoyed doing that. And again, trying to drive home the point that this is an important part of who we are as Americans. It's an important part of something that to be showcased, not hidden, but showcased of how important these rights are and have to be protected. And so we had a great time on the campaign trail, and I just want to thank everybody who was involved in that for what they did to support me. As I've said many times, in doing 385 town hall meetings throughout the state of Iowa, going to over 1,000 of those meetings across this country. What I talked about in the campaign trail, when I talked about those foundational freedoms, and I talked about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and how our rights did come from a creator, they didn't come from the Supreme Court or the President or the Congress. When I talked about those things, and I talked about the integrity of the family and how we had to have both constitutional rights, faith and family, because of course the most important of the constitutional rights, the one that is the trunk which all rights come from, is the freedom of conscience, the freedom of religion. And I talked about that, and I talked about how all these other rights spring from that right. Because if you have the right to speak and you have the right to assemble, but you can't say or assemble for what you believe in, then those are hollow rights. I talked about the integrity and the importance of the family in America, that we had to have a family that was strong, families that were strong to impart those values to the next generation, those values of freedom and opportunity as well as virtue that is necessary for a good and wholesome society. And they talked about how important it was for this good and decent America in order to have limited government, because you can't have limited government if you don't have strong families. You can't have limited government if people aren't behaving well. Government gets bigger as families break down and as society breaks down because there's a lack of virtue in it. Those are simple things that, as I cross this country and talk to people like the folks here in this room, I got a lot of nodding of heads, and people understand that that's the reality of the situation. And yet we don't have a lot of folks in this country who run for political office who talk in those very plain terms. I got those plain terms by traveling around this country and listening to the people, because they very clearly and plainly said that to me, of how important these basic American values. This country was built not from the top down, not by planners and experts designing systems that work in America. No, this country was built from the bottom up by people like are sitting in these chairs in this room who understand what it takes to build a great country, one family, one church, one community, one civic and community organization at a time. That's what makes America great. We are a bottom-up society, not a top-down society. And if there's anything at stake in this election, it is just that. Whether we are going to be a country that is going to be ruled from on high, or are we going to be a country that, like our founders did back in 1776, when faced with the tyranny of those on high ruling them, said, we will not stand for this. We will declare our independence and we will fight. And I'm hopeful that each and every one of you will engage that fight over the next 6 months to make sure we defeat Barack Obama in the general election. And finally, I just want to affirm what you're doing. I want to thank you and I want to affirm you. What you're doing is absolutely vital. Talking about freedom, talking about the essential elements of what made this country great. You are an organization that has been a beacon on this issue for a long, long time. This is about America's freedoms, and there is no organization I know out there that talks about it and focuses on it and does a better job of communicating it than the National Rifle Association. So I just want to say to you, as someone who went out with no chance of ever even making a blip on the political scene a little over a year ago, everyone said, what are you wasting your time for? You're not going to have any money, nobody knows who you are. But what I found is this country is still an amazing country, and that opportunity is still alive and well in this country. Why? Because there are people like you and there are organizations like this across this country who hunger for an America that believes in what made us great, Ronald Reagan, when he left office, in his closing address, issued a warning to the American public. And the warning was his concern about whether Americans going forward were learning about who we are as Americans, what it meant to be an American. You see in this administration a deliberate effort to try to redefine history. Winston Churchill said, the debate is not about the future, it is about the past. And what we've seen from this president is redefining America as a country that is broken and always has been. A country that is unfair, where there's not an equality of opportunity. A country that has done horrible things around the world that we have to go and apologize for. He's trying to redefine who we are and posit the government as the solution to those problems. What the NRA does so effectively and what we as American citizens have to demand and fight for is to tell the real history of America. The real story of America, which is a story that we weren't great. President Obama, in responding to Paul Ryan's budget a year ago, listed all of these government programs. He listed programs from Social Security to Medicare to welfare to unemployment insurance and said this. He says, America is a better country because of these entitlement programs. He says, I'll go one step further. America was not a great country until these programs. You know, ladies and gentlemen, that America was not a great country because government created programs to run your life. America is a great country because it was founded great in God-given rights and free people. And that freedom is at stake. As Governor Romney talked about with respect to the Supreme Court, it's a 5-4 court. If this president is reelected, that 5-4 court may be 5-4 the other way, and the things that we take for granted in America will no longer be taken for granted. Does anybody have any doubt what the decision would be on the Obamacare case if President Obama had 5 votes on that court? And what the meaning would be for the Constitution and any kind of limit on power. We heard it from Justice Ginsburg. Remember Justice Ginsburg was asked the question whether she would recommend the American Constitution for a country starting and try to draft a new Constitution, and her answer was no, she would not. She would recommend the South African Constitution because it was more updated. And she also gave a lecture not too long ago where she talked about all of the court cases that she would overturn or that would be overturned if they were able to get that 5th vote. She listed a whole bunch of them, but she spent most of the time talking about one case. And that, of course, was the Heller decision. She spent her time talking about that case as the principal case that she would like to overturn. This election is the most important election in your lifetime. It's important, vitally important for the Second Amendment, but it's important for all of the amendments, and it's important for the very foundational principles and freedoms of our country. And so I know, as Wayne said earlier, that you are all in. The reason I drove around Iowa in a pickup truck with a guy named Chuck for months on end, with no chance of winning, is because Karen and I and our family felt that we had to be all in. This was not a race. This is not a race that I felt comfortable sitting on the sidelines, and I had to do everything I could. And so I ask all of you to do everything you can. I know there'll always be complaints about, well, I don't like this candidate or that candidate, or they're not as good on these issues or not. we've got to win in this general election. We've got to elect conservatives in our primaries, constitutionalists in our primaries, and then make sure that they are elected in the general election. But we have to be all in. And I pledge to you that even though I'm no longer in this race, that I will be all in between now and November. I will do everything I can to make sure that we elect Republicans, conservatives up and down the ticket. And with your help, we'll make that happen. Thank you all very much. God bless you. God bless the NRA. God bless America. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.